This video will teach you about simple interest, but prior to watching this video, you should have watched another video to help you build background knowledge on interest, on simple interest. So if you haven't done that yet, go back and watch the first video listed on your note sheet. So again, this video is on simple interest. Any notes, definitions, examples should be copied down on your note sheet. So first, let's start with a definition, simple interest. Simple interest is money you earn or pay based on an original amount. So this should be copied down on your note sheet. The formula for calculating simple interest is I equals P times R times T. Again, remember these dots mean multiplication. So for the next few minutes, we're going to break down each of the variables. What does I mean? What does P mean? R and T. So first, let's start with I. I equals interest. It stands for interest. Again, money you earn or pay based on an original amount. Next is P, principal. Principal is the amount of money you start with or originally borrow. Next is R. R stands for rate. The percentage of the principal that you get charged if you borrow money or the percentage you earn if you invest money. To invest money means to put money into like a savings account or a bank account to help it grow so that you have more money. So investing is a good thing. Next is T, which stands for time. How long the money is borrowed or invested, and its time is usually in years. So for example, in the word problems coming up, you'll see very directly like 8 years or 2 years. If it's in months, you have to convert that into years. So let's take a look at we do number 1. To buy a car, you borrowed $3,000 from the bank for 3 years at a rate of 12% each year. How much interest will you pay at the end of 3 years? So first, let's start by writing down our formula. I equals P times R times T. Interest equals principal times rate times time. And then let's just go back and underline the variables that we do know. So again, we're looking for interest. So principal is $3,000, what we originally borrowed or what we start with. Rate is 12% each year, and then time we see is 3 years. So let's plug it into or substitute it into our formula. So principal is $3,000 times rate. Off to the side, rate, just a quick review, rate has to be converted into a decimal, which is what we've been doing for the past few weeks with our skills. So 12% as a decimal is the same as 12 hundredths, so times 12 hundredths. And then we know time is 3 years. So then we just multiply. So let's start by first multiplying 3,000 times 12 hundredths. So 3,000 times 12 hundredths. So first we're multiplying principal times rate. 2 times 0 is 0, 2 times 0 is 0, 2 times 0 is 0, and then 2 times 3 is 6. Add my placeholder. Some of us forget the placeholder part, which is important. 1 times 0 is 0, 1 times 0 is 0, 1 times 0 is 0, and 1 times 3 is 3. Then we add. And then we figure out where our decimal point goes. So then since there's 2 values behind the decimal point, so I move it 1, 2. And then we're going to be using the value 360. So our next step is to take 360 and then multiply it by 3. So 360 times 3. 3 times 0 is 0, 3 times 6 is 18, carry my 1. 3 times 3 is 9, plus 1 is 10. So 1,080. And then let me switch colors. So that means interest, I equals $1,080. So which is our answer, $1,080. But what this actually means is if I borrow $3,000, this is just additional information. If I borrow $3,000 and then I get charged for actually borrowing that money at 12% each year, so for 3 years if I do that, I'm going to have to pay an additional $1,080. So the actual cost of borrowing from the bank, $3,000, is actually $4,080, and that's with interest. So interest, if you're borrowing it, means you have to pay more at the end. So again, our final answer, interest is $1,080, but just as a side note, to actually borrow $3,000 from the bank with interest will actually cost you $4,080. So let's take a look at we do number 2. To buy a new house, you borrowed $6,000 from the bank for 6 months at a rate of 8%. How much interest will you pay after 6 months? So again, start by writing the formula, I equals P times R times T. So interest equals principal times rate times time, and then let's go back and underline all the variables that we know. So what we borrowed, our principal, is $6,000. The rate is 8%, and the time is 6 months. So then let's plug it into our formula. Interest equals, our principal is $6,000. Then off to the side, I'm going to show how we convert 8% as a decimal. 1, 2 would be 800ths. So times 800ths. And then our time, 6 months. So 6 months out of 12 months is the same as 1/2. I know 1/2 as a decimal is 5/10. You could use 50/100ths, but I'm just going to go ahead and use 5/10. So remember, if it's months, convert it to years, which is half a year, so 5/10. And then we just go ahead and multiply. So let's start by multiplying 6,000 times 800ths. So 6,000 times 800ths. 8 times 0 is 0, 8 times 0 is 0, 8 times 0 is 0, 8 times 6 is 48, add my placeholder, and then 0 times 0 is 0, 0, 0, and then 0. Then we add, and then our decimal point goes back 2 places since there's 2 digits behind the decimal point, so 1, 2. And the number we're going to be using is 480. So now let's take 480 and multiply it by 5/10, or 1/2. So 480 times 5/10. 5 times 0 is 0, 5 times 8 is 40. 5 times 4 is 20, plus 4 is 24. Then my decimal point goes back 1 spot, 1 place value, so 240. So interest is equal to $240. So our answer is $240. So very quickly, what does this mean? So if we borrowed $6,000 from the bank at this rate for this long, 6 months, we would have to pay an additional $240 because borrowing, we get charged for it. So what we're really paying to borrow $6,000, if we just add 240, would be $6,240. That's the cost for us to borrow $6,000 with interest. Next, complete the three practice problems at the bottom of your sheet. Be sure to show all of your work using the formula.